Alright guys, so in this video we're going to be working on our new daily, which is a 2001 Chevy Tahoe with the 5.3 liter V8 in it. As you know, I've come to kind of love the LS engines just from working on the red truck. I don't have a lot of experience with them by any means, but I know they're super reliable. They can handle a little bit of power without upgrades. Overall, they're just a good engine that can handle some abuse. And now this is the I think it's like the LZ1 package or whatever. Now typically that model comes with a slightly higher horsepower engine, but this engine has been swapped. I have no idea. I mean, this is a 5.3 still. I have verified, but I have no idea if that's, you know, a ZL1 or whatever engine or not. I'm assuming it's probably just a regular old 5.3 LS, but anyways, what we're going to be doing is giving this thing a little love today. As you can see, we've got some things that need tweaking. The bumper's a little crooked. We're not going to do that today, but the first thing we are going to be doing is the EGR. Now, the guy deleted the EGR on this before I bought it, which is fine typically. Now, Virginia is an emission state. I have read that if you get the EGR tuned out, you will still pass an emissions fine. It doesn't come on any of the newer ones except for maybe like an 02. But the 04s and up don't have the EGR valve. But in this case, it is programmed into our ECU, and it is reading that it is not getting airflow because it's not. The exhaust part is blocked off, and the intake has the cap on it. So we are going to be removing that and installing the EGR hoses. I do still have the original valve on here. I'm going to see if it works. If I put the new hoses on and the valve won't clear after I clean the EGR, then I'll just go ahead and buy a new EGR valve, and it'll take 5 minutes to put on. But this one's going to be a little more challenging. Typically, it would not be. Typically, it'd be about a 30 minutes top install. But let me show you why this is going to take us a few minutes longer. All right, so now when they deleted this, they must have, let's see if I can get y'all in here in a good spot. Sorry about that. So when they deleted this, they must have just said, forget it. We're going to make sure this thing doesn't leak at all. So as you can see, it's actually got some weld around it. So I have a broken stud, one stud still in the bottom, and then weld around it. All that to say, I am not even going to attempt to get that off on the car. I am going to take off the 3 bolts off of the downpipe back here, and then pull the whole entire manifold off. Now, I feel like that's going to be okay because it looks like the bolts are either new or there's some kind of stainless steel bolts in the headers. So I think those will come out fairly easy. But I decided the other day that we will just take the manifold off because I'm going to need to either drill, tap that hole, extract the stud, whatever ends up working better. Probably going to end up drilling both of them out and retapping them. So the 30-minute job turns into a lot longer of a job. If those 3 downpipe bolts come off relatively easy and the manifold bolts come out easy, that's relatively the hardest part. Then I just got to grind that crusty weld down, which will be no problem because it was a very bad weld. No hate, I'm not a professional welder, but it's pretty bubbled up, and it'll be easy to grind off and get that off. Then I can cut the remaining bolt if I need to, but I'm going to try to work it out because that's one less hole I have to thread and tap, and then I do need to thread and tap the top hole. And then we can hook up our EGR stuff. So first thing we're going to do is pull off this entire intake because I do have a cold air coming in the mail. Let's get this off, and I'll bring y'all back when that stuff is disconnected. So here is the air intake stuff. You've got the air box, which sits in here like so. We will not be needing that. Okay, terrible throw. This is the lid of the airbox with the MAF sensor. We will not throw that because I just have the MAF sensor sitting in there. So we'll just set that in the shed for now. And then this is the, you know, you want to believe that engineers know what they're doing. And I guarantee you there's a good reason for all this. But, I mean, this thing is just a monstrosity. It takes up this whole entire, let me get you a better angle, takes up this whole entire space in here. I mean, this whole thing is filled with just airbox garbage. Now we can actually see the EGR and the header, and again, it would be a 10-minute install or 30 minutes without those manifolds and broken bolts. So this guy, not going back on if it kills me. Gone, done, scrap as far as I'm concerned. So We'll set this in the shed. Still got to crawl under the car and get those 3 manifold bolts off, but that is next. Well, somehow I got super fortunate and 3. So we've got all 3 of the nuts and we didn't break a stud. First one, peasy easy. In theory, yep, up comes the dipstick. It's going to have oil on it, obviously. Definitely going to want your air intake off, whether you're replacing it or not. And donut gasket is still on, so we're good there. And here it is. So now you can see a little bit better, and I'll show you that more in the shed, what that looks like and what we need to do with that. But it's out. Now we'll obviously clean up this surface. Whew. Definitely got some soot and junk in there. Not really going to worry about that. But we'll clean up this mating surface, and we will clean up the mating surface on the engine. And I actually have another gasket from the Dakota. So I've got a gasket as well. Now, first thing we'll be doing is trying to remove the bolt that's still in here. And then we will have to grind off all this weld, pop that sucker off, and then we will have to clean up that surface area and get the bolt out that's still in there, which that could be the interesting part. So after proving what we already knew, that this is probably not going to come off, time to break out my best friend. So I'm going to throw a cutting wheel on here, cut this bolt. I'm going to go around, man, they boogered weld on there. I'm going to go around the flange as best as I can and try to grind all this weld off and then try to kind of leverage it to snap it. So that way, I don't want to cut into this manifold piece, because then I'm going to have to kind of try to plane that surface with a grinder, which isn't ideal. So let's get the cutoff wheel and see if we can get that guy off. So we got the one bolt off the bottom there. I ground away at the top one. Now again, I'm trying not to dig into the back side of this at all. So what I'm going to do now is kind of get all the weld off I can get to. They somehow managed to kind of weld back in there, which I can't get to. And then I'm going to work not a screwdriver, but like a wedge, a chisel in there, and just kind of work it and see if I can break it off. Then I can gently clean up the area where there's still weld, and hopefully that will take care of it. So for this, we're going to throw on the grinding wheel, not the cutting wheel. Yeah, I can see it lifting. Okay, now I just want to work it from the areas where it's lifting up the most. Like this side is lifting real nice. Thank goodness that weld was horrible. All right, now I don't have an EGR gasket, which is something I should have thought of, but they basically just welded up this whole end, and this is what was just sticking in there. So obviously no bueno. Now what they were doing was effective. I honestly think it had a few exhaust leaks, but that's okay. It worked for what they needed. Well, a couple broken bits later, and we got it. So, few changes I'll make. Instead of tapping and putting threads in the hole, I still could, but I think for this, to keep it easy, especially if I ever have to do this again, or I run into an issue or an exhaust leak or something doesn't seal right, I want to make it simple. So I'm going to do a bolt and a nut. A little bit more janky. It's already kind of janky. I can always buy another manifold and do it right. But here's what we're looking at. So I kind of gently went over it with everything. You can see it's holes all the way through. I've got enough space for nuts on the back. I went ahead and quickly went over these guys. I did all this by hand, not the grinder. This mating surface doesn't have to be anything special because it uses such thick gaskets. They're like almost 1/8-inch thick gaskets. This guy, this piece right here for the EGR valve, do not have a gasket for, but if my memory serves me correctly, oh yes it does. I knew I've got this exhaust gasket paper. I contemplated not even showing you all this, but this is kind of what we're working with here. These things are super hard to cut small holes on. I was able to drill these holes. Those are fine. But this bigger hole in the center, I don't want it to be oversized for this, but I'm okay with it being a little bit on the small side. I think I'd prefer that because there's going to be less chance of the edge blowing out. But doing it with snips is just, it's barbaric, really. It doesn't work very good. Well, we got it. It's on. Pretty ugly. Part of it's just because I don't have the right size bolts. The only ones I have that fit are too long. And quite frankly, I don't want to cut them and weld them, so I'm using a nut as a thick washer. But that's okay, because you won't even really see it. And if I really am bothered by it, I'll come back, do the 2 bolts, put the 2 new ones in. But this is what it looks like in a nutshell. So it is still loose, but I have it on here. Jank. I know. Roast me in the comments, because it's pretty bad. But it's functional. I will position it all perfectly once I get it on the car. Right now it's a little, looks like off to the side. So I'll make sure it's as seated over it as I can. Because my holes I was drilling into bolts, they're not perfectly centered. So I'm a little bit worried about this gasket blowing out. But if I start having problems with it, I'll do a version 2 or just buy a new manifold. Alright guys, so we have the exhaust manifold back on here. I didn't video it. The steps are the exact same, just reverse. So slide the manifold on. I got my gasket in place, started a couple bolts, did the 3 bolts on the flange, snugged up the manifold, tightened the 3 bolts, tightened everything down, fed my oil dipstick tube back down, tightened that back up. EGR valve is hanging out right here, which I'll show you all in a second. Now, the one thing we still have to do is take this cover off, which, if I remember correctly, is a 8mm. So you can see this little silver piece. That's a block-off plate. The EGR, this guy, is going to plug in right there. Now, just like that, I believe. Man, I really wish they gave you a bottom bolt hole. I don't understand the thought process there, but I guess, I mean, this just looks like a great vacuum source, or a vacuum leak source to me, but maybe I'm crazy. So this is great, but they did not have the bracket for the EGR here. And if you can't really leave it like this, I would definitely be worried about it just snapping those hoses with it just vibrating and wobbling. So we will have to make our own, which is not a big deal. I just wish I would have known that, because they had a bracket over here, which is actually just for these heater core lines to go into, but because they had the lines in there, or because they had the EGR valve on there, stupid me just assumed that that was the bracket, when really the bracket is somewhere right up over here. So, well, it is obviously dark out here, guys, but we've got it on. So I tightened up those bolts down there. Let's see if you can kind of see it. Well, you kind of can, but you know where it's at. So everything's tightened back up. This is where the EGR sits in here, right there. Again, you can kind of see right here, I've just got this little basic bracket. I just had some scrap steel. I didn't even bother prettying it up. But it is actually pretty solid. Like, it's not going to vibrate around. At some point, I'll come back and do a proper 2-bolt bracket. That way it could never loosen and kind of want to swivel or pivot. And then it goes right up there into the air intake. And that's it, guys. So, only thing left I have to do tonight is just put the cold air on, which I hope Amazon has dropped off. But after that, I'm going to clear the codes, start it up, and then we'll just kind of watch it as we drive. Well, so, sad news. Cold air is not in yet. I just refuse to put that old clunky air filter back on. It says it's still due in tonight. I don't know what time. It's almost 6 o'clock right now, so I'm probably going to clean up the shed a little bit, just kind of put my tools back where they belong, and it's a little messy right now, as you can see, but just kind of get that reorganized, and hopefully it comes in and I can still put it on and test it tonight, but it is what it is, you know. If not, we'll be firing it up tomorrow. But as always, guys, thanks again for watching. Again, I'll preface this. This is like a worst case scenario EGR valve where you don't have the original bracket. Someone goober welded up your manifold. Obviously, I would have already been done if I had the bracket, the right gaskets, the manifold. But I was able to save, I've just round up, let's say $100 with cheap parts. I was able to save about $100. So if you're in the same situation, it's doable. Takes a little bit of patience, time. Probably going to break a few bits, maybe if they're not Arbor Freight and they're a little bit more durable, but it is absolutely doable. So I am going to wrap up this video here, and it's a little bit different than what I was trying to say was it's something a little different than the Dakota content. It's still an LS, I know, but this is just some daily work that every car needs every now and then. So I'll be sure to post some videos like this here and there as well if I'm doing a little project on the daily or someone else's car, just for variety and content. But thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.